Tears refused to fall over forged wire transfers. Screams died instantly upon realizing my husband stole my startup's funding, buying his Mistress a vanity company, bleeding out on our imported hardwood floor, watching polished leather shoes step delicately over my hand. Cold rage froze my beating heart. Both parasites took everything built from scratch. Now, breath returns. 24 hours remain. Burning their entire world to ash stands as my sole purpose. The scent of peppermint and expensive leather is what I will always associate with my own death. It was a Tuesday night. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse, the glass vibrating with a low, continuous hum. I remember the exhaustion sitting in my bones like lead. We had just closed the funding round for Omni, the supply chain logistics software I had spent 5 years coding in cramped, windowless rooms while Thomas played the supportive, charming husband. He handled the business side. He shook the hands, bought the scotch, and smiled with all his teeth. I built the engine. I was looking for an aspirin. Thomas was in the shower, the hot water running relentlessly, sending thick plumes of eucalyptus-scented steam rolling under the bathroom door. His laptop was open on the kitchen island. I didn't snoop. Not initially. I just brushed the trackpad when I reached for the glass of water. The screen flared to life, bright and sterile in the dim kitchen. It wasn't a spreadsheet for Omni. It was a banking portal, an offshore account portal. The numbers were too large, too specific. $2.4 million. My breath hitched, catching somewhere in the back of my throat. I scrolled. The friction of my dry fingertip against the glass pad was the only sound in the room, cutting through the drumming rain. Transfer to Aura Wellness Corp. Authorized by Thomas Cole. Funding source, Omni Logistics Series. Escrow. I knew Aura Wellness. It was a boutique lifestyle brand that had popped up out of nowhere, selling overpriced essential oils and silk robes. I also knew who ran it, Evelyn, our dynamic, young PR consultant, the one who always left a cloying trail of vanilla perfume in our conference rooms. The nausea hit me first, a sour, metallic taste flooding the back of my tongue. He hadn't just cheated. Cheating was mundane. Cheating was a cliché. He had siphoned the lifeblood of my company, the capital meant to keep 300 employees on payroll, to fund his mistress's hobby. He had hollowed out my life's work to buy her affection. The shower stopped. The bathroom door clicked open. Thomas walked out, vigorously rubbing a thick towel through his damp, dark hair. He was wearing the plush, charcoal robe I had bought him for his birthday. He looked up, a relaxed, easy smile forming on his lips. Then he saw where I was standing. He saw the harsh blue light of the laptop illuminating my face. The smile didn't entirely vanish. It just morphed. It hardened into a tight, patronizing line. "Claire," he sighed, dropping the towel onto a pristine white chair. "You shouldn't be looking at that." $2.4 million, I whispered. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. I pointed at the screen. My finger was trembling so violently, I tapped the glass twice. "You moved the escrow. You funded Evelyn. It's an investment, Claire. Diversification." He took a step forward. He smelled of peppermint body wash and arrogance. "Omni is hitting a plateau. You're too deep in the code to see the market trends. Aura is projecting massive retail growth." "It's my company." My voice cracked, the volume suddenly shattering the quiet. "It's my code, my equity. You stole it to buy a company for your whore." His jaw clenched. The mask of the supportive husband cracked, revealing the cold, opportunistic parasite underneath. "Don't be dramatic. I'm the CFO. I have discretionary authority. And let's be honest, you wouldn't have gotten half those meetings without me. He stepped closer. I stepped back. The anger in my chest was blinding, making the edges of my vision blur. I lunged for the laptop, a desperate animal instinct to close it, to take it, to somehow drag the money back through the screen. Thomas grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, painfully tight, bone, grindingly tight. "Stop it, Claire," he hissed. "You're being hysterical. Let go of me!" I jerked my arm back. He didn't let go. He twisted, using his weight to yank me away from the island. I was wearing socks on polished hardwood. My foot slipped. I fell backward, arms flailing, grabbing at the air. The corner of the heavy, imported marble coffee table caught me squarely at the base of my skull. The sound wasn't a crack. It was a wet, heavy thud. Pain exploded behind my eyes. A brilliant, blinding flash of white light, followed immediately by a wave of cold numbness that rushed down my spine. I lay on the floor, staring up at the ceiling. The geometric patterns of the chandelier began to swim and distort. I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't move my arms. Thomas stood over me. He looked down, his expression unreadable. He didn't drop to his knees. He didn't pull out his phone. He just watched the dark pool of blood begin to creep out from beneath my hair, staining the cream fibers of the Persian rug. "I told you," he murmured, his voice distant, muffled by the ringing in my ears. "You shouldn't have looked." He stepped over my left hand. His leather slipper brushed against my knuckles. I could smell the leather. I could smell the peppermint. I could feel the cold seeping into my skin. He walked away. He left me there to drown in the dark. I gasped, my lungs expanding so violently my ribs ached. I shot up in bed, my hands flying to the back of my neck. My fingers scrambled through my hair, pressing into my scalp. No blood, no hole, just cold, clammy sweat matting my roots. My heart was hammering against my sternum, like a trapped bird. Thump, thump, thump. The room was dark, but not the pitch black of death. It was the soft, gray light of early morning. I threw off the heavy duvet. The friction of the high thread count sheets against my legs felt electric, overwhelming. I stumbled out of bed, my knees buckling slightly, and caught myself on the edge of the dresser. The wood was solid, real. I stared into the mirror above the dresser. My face was pale, my eyes wide and bloodshot. I looked terrifying. I looked alive. What happened? I turned around. The bed was empty. The sound of running water echoed from the master bathroom. The smell of eucalyptus and peppermint drifted out from beneath the door. A violent shiver racked my body. I backed away, pressing myself against the cold glass of the bedroom window. I looked out at the city below. It wasn't raining. The streets were dry, bathed in the creeping amber glow of dawn. I lunged for my phone on the nightstand. The screen flared, blinding me for a second. Tuesday, October 14th, 6 a.m. My thumb hovered over the glass. October 14th, the day the Series B funds cleared. The day I signed the final discretionary authorization forms, giving Thomas sole access to the escrow accounts. The day he funneled the money. The day I died. I dropped the phone. It hit the carpet with a soft thud. I backed into the corner of the room, sliding down the wall until my knees hit my chest. I wrapped my arms around myself, shaking uncontrollably. This wasn't a dream. The memory of the marble table was too sharp. The feeling of the blood pooling too warm. The sheer, apathetic emptiness in his eyes too real. I had died, and somehow, by some impossible glitch in the universe, I had been spat back out exactly 16 hours before it happened. I pressed my face into my knees. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. I wanted to run into the bathroom, grab the heavy ceramic soap dispenser, and smash it into his lying, smiling face. But a sudden, sharp clarity cut through the panic. A cold, cynical voice in the back of my mind whispered, "If you kill him now, you go to jail. If you leave him now, he still has the leverage. He still has the authorization. He will take the money, and you will be left with nothing." I had built Omni from the ground up. I wrote the core algorithm on a stolen laptop in a freezing studio apartment. I didn't sleep for years. I sacrificed my youth, my health, and my sanity to build an empire, and he was going to take it all before dinner. I stopped shaking. The tears dried, leaving tight tracks of salt on my cheeks. I stood up. I walked into my closet and pulled out a suit. Not the soft, accommodating gray knit I usually wore to the office. I pulled out the sharp, structured black Armani suit I only wore to board meetings. The armor. By the time Thomas walked out of the bathroom, drying his hair with a white towel, I was seated on the edge of the bed, perfectly composed, buttoning the cuffs of a crisp, white silk blouse. "Morning, babe," he said, offering that easy, brilliant smile. The smile that had charmed investors, the smile that had won me over 5 years ago, the smile that he wore while I bled to death. It took everything in my power not to vomit. The smell of peppermint made my stomach churn. I forced my facial muscles to pull upward. It felt like stretching old rubber. "Morning," I said. My voice was startlingly steady. He tossed the towel aside and walked to his closet. "Big day today. The escrow clears at noon. We just need to do the final sign-offs with the bank at 2, and we're officially capitalized." "Right," I said, standing up and smoothing down the front of my trousers. "The sign-offs. You okay?" he asked, pausing to look at me, his brow furrowed in a facsimile of concern. "You look pale and dressed up." "I'm fine. Didn't sleep well," I lied smoothly. "And I have a meeting with the tech team. I want to establish authority early on the new integrations." He chuckled, a condescending sound. "Just don't scare them, killer. Leave the aggressive posturing to me, all right? You just keep the code clean." I looked at him, really looked at him. The slight puffiness under his eyes, the expensive watch he bought with his first Omni bonus. He was so incredibly arrogant. He believed I was stupid. He believed I was just a code monkey who got lucky, entirely dependent on his business acumen. He didn't realize that to build an AI that can predict global supply chain collapses, you have to understand how to map human greed, error, and vulnerability. I understood systems, and right now, Thomas was a system I was about to dismantle. "I'll see you at the office," I said, grabbing my briefcase. "Love you," he called out as I walked down the hall. I didn't answer. The Omni offices occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass building downtown. The elevator ride up felt like a slow ascension to a battlefield. The doors dinged open, and the familiar cacophony hit me. The low hum of server cooling systems, the staccato clatter of 50 mechanical keyboards, the smell of burnt break-room espresso. It was my sanctuary. I walked past the glass-walled conference rooms, my heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete floors. Heads turned. I didn't usually wear black. I didn't usually walk with my spine perfectly rigid. "Claire," I stopped. The cloying, artificial scent of vanilla hit my nostrils before she even reached me. "Evelyn." She was carrying a stack of press releases, looking flawless in a beige cashmere sweater and tailored skirt. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out. She smiled warmly, her eyes wide and innocent. "Good morning," Evelyn chirped. "Thomas told me the escrow clears today. Huge congratulations. I've already started drafting the press release for the expansion." I looked at her. I looked at the slight flush in her cheeks. I wondered when he had told her. Last night, in bed. Did they laugh about the dumb, oblivious wife who was funding their little romance? "Thanks, Evelyn," I said. My voice was devoid of inflection. Her smile faltered slightly, confused by the lack of my usual frantic, accommodating energy. "I was thinking we could position the PR angle around your partnership with Thomas. The power couple narrative plays well with Forbes. Hold off on the press release," I said, stepping past her. "Oh, but Thomas said—" I said, "Hold off, Evelyn." I stopped and turned my head, locking eyes with her. "Thomas handles the schmoozing. I handle the company. And right now, the company doesn't need a press release. Am I clear?" She blinked, physically taking a step back. Yes, of course, Claire." I walked into my office and locked the glass door. I closed the motorized blinds, shutting out the floor. I threw my briefcase onto the desk, opened my laptop, and took a deep, shuddering breath. I had exactly 6 hours before the funds settled in the escrow account, and 8 hours before the 2 p.m. signing, where Thomas expected me to hand over the dual signature requirement. I pulled up the corporate banking portal. Thomas was the CFO, but I was the CEO and majority shareholder. He had manipulated the board into giving him broad discretionary power by arguing I was too busy with development to handle day-to-day finances. The trap he had set relied on me signing a specific addendum today at 2 p.m., an addendum that waived the dual authorization protocol for transfers under $5 million. He needed that signature to move the $2.4 million to Aura Wellness. But Thomas wasn't a tech genius. He was a finance bro with a smooth voice. He didn't understand the backdoor protocols I had built into our proprietary internal banking software. I started typing. My fingers flew across the keyboard, muscle memory taking over. I bypassed the standard interface, diving into the administrative terminal. First step, freeze. I initiated a shadow lock on the escrow account. It wouldn't show up on his end. The bank would see the funds clear at noon, but any outbound wire would require a biometric key, my biometric key. Second step, the paper trail. He was using a shell company, Lumina Ventures, to funnel the money to Aura. I knew the name from the laptop screen the night I died. I ran a cross-database search, utilizing a web scraping script I had built years ago to vet dodgy vendors. It took 5 minutes for the script to chew through state registry data. There it was, Lumina Ventures. Registered agent, Evelyn Hayes. Registered address, a high-end residential condo downtown. The same condo Thomas claimed he leased as a corporate retreat for out-of-town investors. I downloaded the incorporation documents, the lease agreements, and the tax IDs. I compiled it all into a single, encrypted folder. Third step, the executioner. I picked up my desk phone and dialed a private number. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Simon," I said. Simon Vance was our lead investor from the Series A round. He was a ruthlessly pragmatic, old-school venture capitalist who hated Thomas and only tolerated him because my software was making him rich. "Claire," Simon rasped, "you don't usually call this early. Shouldn't you be popping champagne? Series B clears today. Simon, I need you at the Omni office at 1:30 p.m. today. Bring your corporate counsel." There was a pause on the line, the sound of a lighter flicking. "That doesn't sound like a champagne invitation." "It's not," I said, staring at the compiled folder of Thomas's embezzlement scheme. Thomas is attempting to misappropriate $2.4 million from the Series B escrow to a shell company owned by his mistress. Silence. Heavy, calculating silence. "Are you certain, Claire?" Simon's tone shifted from casual to razor sharp. "Because if you're pulling a domestic dispute into the boardroom, I'll string you both up. I have the state registry filings, the shell company structure, and the lease agreements tying them together. I replied evenly, my voice a dead calm. He intends to execute the wire today at 2 o'clock under the guise of an unapproved discretionary addendum. I need you here to trigger the immediate breach of fiduciary duty clause in our operating agreement. He's a dead man, Simon said, the absolute lack of emotion in his voice oddly comforting. If what you say is true, I will personally see him stripped of his equity and buried in litigation until his grandchildren are bankrupt. No, I corrected him. He's mine. You just bring the lawyers to make the termination immediate and ironclad. I'll handle the rest. 1:30, Simon agreed and hung up. I placed the phone down. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the adrenaline. I looked at the clock on my monitor. 9:15 a.m. I had 5 hours. 5 hours until Thomas walked into the trap. 5 hours until the man who watched me bleed to death realized I was holding the knife. I opened the blinds of my office, letting the bright, sterile light of the bullpen flood in. Through the glass, I could see Thomas stepping out of the elevator. He was laughing, handing a coffee to Evelyn. His hand lingered on her arm for a fraction of a second too long. I smiled. It was a cold, jagged thing. Enjoy the coffee, Thomas. It's the last one you'll ever afford. The worst part about knowing someone is going to betray you is how flawlessly they perform their love in the hours leading up to it. At 11:30 a.m., my office door swung open. Thomas walked in, carrying a brown paper bag from the Artisan Deli 3 blocks away. He smiled, holding it up like a peace offering. The smell of toasted sourdough and balsamic vinaigrette instantly filled the small, climate-controlled space. I know you said you were establishing authority today, he said, setting the bag on my desk and pulling out a heavy, plastic-wrapped container. But even tech dictators need to eat. I got you the roasted fig and prosciutto salad, extra balsamic. I stared at the salad. It was my favorite. He remembered my favorite salad on the exact same day he planned to bankrupt my life's work. The cognitive dissonance was a physical weight in my chest, a tight, suffocating pressure pressing against my ribs. I looked up at him. His tie was loosened just a fraction, projecting that image of the hard-working, accessible executive. This was the man who had rubbed my back when my code wouldn't compile. This was the man who had held my hand at my mother's funeral. This was the man who had looked at my bleeding head on the rug and simply walked away. Thank you, I managed to say. The words felt like swallowing ground glass. Are you sure you're all right, Claire? He leaned over the desk, resting his knuckles on the edge of the mahogany. The scent of his peppermint body wash invaded my space, overriding the balsamic. My stomach seized. You're vibrating. You're literally shaking. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, the fingertips tapping a chaotic rhythm against my thighs. I forced them flat onto the cool surface of the desk. It's just the adrenaline, I said, forcing my eyes to meet his. I had to perform. If I faltered now, he would sense the shift. Series B. It's a lot, Thomas chuckled, a soft, reassuring sound. He reached across the desk and briefly placed his hand over mine. His skin was warm. It made my skin crawl so violently, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from snatching my hand back. We made it, Claire. All those late nights. It pays off today. He squeezed my hand and let go, checking the Rolex on his wrist. Escrow clears in 30 minutes. I'll print the addendum for the 2 p.m. signing. Just eat your lunch, okay? I need my CEO sharp. He turned and walked out, closing the glass door softly behind him. I grabbed the heavy plastic salad container and threw it into the trash can under my desk. The thud was deeply satisfying. I turned back to my monitors. The countdown in my head was deafening. I opened the encrypted folder containing the Lumina Ventures Shell Company documents. I read through the lease agreement again. Evelyn's signature, all looping and overly stylized, next to Thomas's sharp, aggressive scrawl. They hadn't even tried to cover their tracks thoroughly. They were protected by their sheer, absolute confidence in my blind trust. At exactly 12 p.m., my screen flashed. A notification from the corporate banking portal. Deposit confirmed. $15 million US. Omni Logistics Series I. Be escrow. The money was there. The lifeblood of my company. I watched the terminal. My breath hitched. For 10 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then, a line of code executed on the back-end monitor. Outbound wire initiated. $2,400,000 US. Destination, Lumina Ventures. Status, pending secondary authorization. He was trying to move it early. He couldn't even wait for the 2 p.m. meeting. He was sitting at his desk, manually attempting to bypass the dual signature requirement using his administrative credentials, hoping the bank's automated system would just push it through based on his CFO status. A second line of red text appeared. Authorization failed. Biometric lock engaged. I let out a long, shuddering exhale, slumping back into my ergonomic chair. The leather squeaked under my weight. The lock held. He was trapped. My desk phone rang. It was Thomas's extension. I picked it up. Claire. Hey. His voice was tight. The easy charm completely evaporated. Did you touch the banking permissions on the escrow account? The bank enforces a standard hold until the final paperwork is signed at 2, Thomas. We discussed this. I lied, seamlessly. My voice was calm, completely stripped of the panic I had felt yesterday. I was in my element now. Systems and protocols. Right, of course, he muttered, though I could hear the frantic clicking of his mouse in the background. Just checking. See you at 2. Actually, I said, let's do it at 1:30, in the main boardroom. I want the space. He hesitated. 1:30? The bank rep isn't calling in until 2. I have some internal structuring to go over before we get on the call with them. Just bring the addendum. Sure, 1:30. The line clicked dead. I looked at the clock. 1 hour. I smoothed the lapels of my black suit jacket, stood up, and walked to the door. The air in the office felt entirely different now. It was thin, sharp, and electric. The main boardroom was a glass-walled rectangle suspended in the center of the office, designed to project transparency. Today, it was going to be an aquarium. At 1:25 p.m., the elevator doors chimed. Simon stepped out. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s, smelling faintly of stale tobacco and expensive dry cleaning. He didn't wear a tie, just a crisp blue shirt unbuttoned at the collar, but he carried an aura of absolute authority. Flanking him were 2 men in dark, conservative suits, carrying heavy leather briefcases. Corporate counsel, the executioners. I met them at the reception desk. Simon didn't smile. He just gave me a curt, acknowledging nod. Everything in order, Claire? He asked, his voice a low gravel. Everything is ready, in here. Please. I led them into the boardroom. The 2 lawyers immediately began unpacking their briefcases, laying out thick stacks of watermarked paper. Simon took a seat at the far end of the long marble table, folding his hands over his stomach. I stood by the window, my back to the door, staring out at the city skyline. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a stark contrast to the cold stillness of the room. At exactly 1:30 p.m., the door handle clicked. Thomas walked in. He held a blue folder in one hand and a silver pen in the other. He had put his jacket back on. Right behind him, carrying a sleek tablet and smelling of vanilla, was Evelyn. Thomas stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes darted from me to the two lawyers, and finally landed on Simon. The confident swagger evaporated instantly, replaced by a rigid, awkward tension. "Simon," Thomas said, recovering slightly, though his voice was a pitch higher than normal. He forced a smile and stepped forward, extending his hand. "We weren't expecting you. I thought we were just doing internal structuring before the bank call." Simon didn't move. He didn't look at Thomas's hand. He just stared at him with the cold, dead eyes of a shark assessing a wounded seal. "We are doing internal structuring," Simon said flatly. Thomas slowly lowered his hand. He looked at me, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "Claire, what's going on? Who are these gentlemen?" "Sit down, Thomas," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet authority in the room was suffocating. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably by the door, clutching her tablet to her chest. Should I leave?" "No, Evelyn," I said, turning to face her fully. "Take a seat. You're an integral part of this restructuring." Thomas pulled out a chair and sat. He placed the blue folder on the table, keeping his hand over it. "Claire, we need to sign the addendum. The escrow is locked," I interrupted. I walked to the head of the table and sat down. I pulled a manila folder from my portfolio and slid it across the smooth marble. It stopped perfectly in front of Thomas, and it will remain locked. "Open the folder, Thomas." He stared at the folder like it was a live explosive. He looked at me, a flicker of real anger crossing his features. "Claire, this isn't the time for whatever power play you're trying to pull in front of Simon. We have a bank." "Open the damn folder, Thomas," Simon barked. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Thomas flinched. He reached out, his fingers slightly unsteady, and flipped the cover open. I watched his face. I watched the exact moment his world collapsed. First, his eyes hit the wire transfer logs I had intercepted at noon. The $2.4 million attempted bypass. Then, he turned the page. The incorporation papers for Lumina Ventures. Then, the commercial lease agreement signed by Evelyn. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. His skin turned an ashy, sickly gray. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the overhead air conditioning. "Lumina Ventures," I said, the words tasting like copper on my tongue. "A shell company designed to funnel Series B capital into Aura Wellness, authorized by you, managed by Evelyn." Evelyn gasped. The tablet slipped from her hands, clattering loudly onto the table. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice trembling. Thomas swallowed hard. His eyes darted frantically around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a narrative, looking for a way to spin this. He defaulted to the only tactic he knew: gaslighting. "Claire, you don't understand," he stammered, pointing at the papers. This is a strategic investment. Aura is booming. I was doing this to protect us, to diversify your portfolio before Omni hits a plateau. You attempted a covert wire transfer of $2.4 million into a company owned by your mistress without board approval or my consent," I said. My voice was eerily steady, disconnected from the roaring in my ears. I remembered the cold floor. I remembered his polished shoes. "That's not diversification. That's felony embezzlement." "Mistress?" Simon echoed, his eyebrows raised in a mask of mock surprise. He looked at Evelyn, who was now shrinking into her chair, her face flushed crimson. "Jesus, Thomas, you're not just a thief. You're a walking cliché. It's not what it looks like." Thomas slammed his hand down on the papers. The sudden violence made Evelyn jump. He glared at me, the mask entirely gone, revealing the cornered, desperate animal underneath. "You're insane, Claire. You've always been paranoid. You set this up." "I set up your signature on a commercial lease for a luxury condo?" I asked, tilting my head. "I typed the routing numbers into the terminal at 12 p.m. today. You are holding a folder containing digital forensics that trace directly back to your IP address, Thomas. You left a trail so wide, a first-year accounting student could have followed it." Thomas looked at the lawyers. They sat like statues, watching him bleed out. "Simon, please." Thomas turned to the VC, his voice dropping into a pathetic, pleading register. "She's hysterical. She's misunderstanding the financial strategy here. I'm the CFO. I have discretionary. You have nothing." Simon cut him off, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. "As of this exact moment, you are in breach of your fiduciary duties, in violation of your employment contract, and in breach of the operating agreement of this company." Simon nodded to the lawyer on his right. The man slid a thick, bound document across the table. "This is your separation agreement," the lawyer said, speaking for the first time. His voice was smooth, practiced, and entirely devoid of empathy. "You are resigning effective immediately. You are forfeiting all vested and unvested equity in Omni Logistics to cover the damages and legal fees associated with your attempted fraud. Furthermore, you will vacate the premises immediately." Thomas stared at the document. His breathing was shallow and rapid. "And if I don't sign it?" "If you don't sign it," Simon leaned forward, resting his forearms on the marble. "I pick up my phone, I call my contacts at the SEC, and I hand them this folder. Then, Claire calls the FBI field office downtown and reports a multi-million-dollar corporate embezzlement. You will be in handcuffs before the market closes. You will lose the equity anyway, but you'll spend the next decade in federal prison trying to explain supply chain logistics to your cellmate." Thomas looked at me. His eyes were wide, glassy, with unshed tears of panic. He was searching for the woman who loved him. He was searching for the woman who accommodated him, who shrank herself so he could feel big. I looked back at him. I gave him absolutely nothing, just a cold, blank stare. "Sign the paper, Thomas," I whispered, "or I will destroy you." The destruction of a man's ego is an ugly, messy thing to witness. It doesn't happen with a dramatic explosion. It happens with a pathetic, whimpering collapse. Thomas looked down at the pen resting on the separation agreement. His hands were shaking so violently he couldn't pick it up on the first try. His fingers fumbled against the polished metal. He looked at Evelyn. "Evelyn, tell them," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Tell them it was a joint venture. Tell them you were handling the compliance." Evelyn's head snapped up. The shock on her face was profound. The man who had bought her expensive dinners, who had promised her an empire funded by his wife's labor, was throwing her under the bus the second the wheels started turning. "Excuse me?" Evelyn's voice shook, but the fear was rapidly morphing into indignation. "You told me the funds were cleared. You told me it was a legitimate corporate sponsorship. I didn't know you were stealing it." "Don't lie," Thomas snarled, his face twisting in ugly desperation. "You wanted the retail expansion. You begged me for the seed money. I didn't tell you to steal it from your wife, you psycho." Evelyn stood up, her chair screeching violently against the floor. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup, leaving jagged black streaks of mascara down her cheeks. She looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. "Claire, I swear to God, I didn't know he was doing it like this. He told me you knew. He told me you approved it as a tax write-off. I watched them tear each other apart. Yesterday, they were untouchable. They were laughing in my penthouse, drinking my wine, spending my money, entirely content to step over my corpse. Today, they were rats in a cage, cannibalizing each other to survive. I felt a brief, hollow pang of sadness, not for Thomas, but for the ghost of the life I thought I had. I mourned the illusion, but the grief was quickly swallowed by a cold, settling peace. "It doesn't matter what you knew, Evelyn," I said quietly, stopping her frantic apologies. "You are the registered agent of a fraudulent shell company. You are implicated." Evelyn sobbed, pressing her hands over her mouth. I turned my attention back to Thomas. "Sign the paper." He picked up the pen. He didn't read the 50-page document. He didn't try to negotiate. He flipped to the back page, his hand trembling so badly the pen scratched against the paper and scrawled a jagged, illegible version of his signature. He pushed the document back across the table. He looked exhausted. He looked 10 years older than when he had walked into the room 15 minutes ago. "Are you happy now?" he spat, the words laced with a venomous, impotent rage. "You took everything." "No, Thomas," I said, collecting the signed agreement and handing it to the lawyer. "I kept what was mine. You are the one who leaves with nothing." "You're a cold, calculating bitch," he hissed, standing up. "Gentlemen," Simon said, snapping his fingers. The boardroom door opened. 2 large men in omni-corporate security uniforms stepped in. I had quietly arranged for them to wait by the elevators. "Mr. Cole," the head of security said, his voice entirely devoid of respect. "We need your key card, your corporate phone, and your laptop. Then we will escort you to the lobby." Thomas looked at the guards, then back at me. The reality of his absolute removal finally set in. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone and his keycard, and tossed them onto the marble table. They slid and hit Evelyn's discarded tablet with a sharp clack. He turned and walked out of the boardroom, flanked by the guards. He didn't look back. Evelyn was still standing by the table, trembling, clutching her expensive cashmere sweater around herself as if it could protect her from the fallout. "Claire, please," she whimpered. "I'll dissolve Lumina. I'll give back the advance. Just, please don't press charges." I looked at her, stripped of the vanilla perfume and the PR buzzwords. She was just a frightened, foolish girl who had bet on the wrong horse. "Pack your desk, Evelyn," I said, my voice completely flat. "You're fired. If I ever see your name associated with this company again, I will let Simon's lawyers bury you. Get out." She practically ran out of the room, her heels clicking frantically against the concrete floor. The heavy glass door swung shut, sealing the boardroom in silence once again. The lawyers began packing up their briefcases, their movements efficient and robotic. Simon remained seated, watching me intently. "That was remarkably clean, Claire," Simon said softly, lighting a cigarette, despite the building's strict no-smoking policy. I didn't stop him. The smell of the smoke was a welcome change from the peppermint and vanilla. Most founders would have screamed. You just surgically dismantled him. "Screaming doesn't get your money back, Simon," I said. My hands were shaking again, but I didn't hide them this time. I let them tremble. I let the adrenaline crash over me in cold, shivering waves. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and buried my face in my hands. It was over. The man who killed me was gone. The money was safe. The company was mine. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt bruised, hollowed out, and incredibly tired. But as I took a deep breath, inhaling the sharp, sterile air of the boardroom mixed with Simon's cheap tobacco, I felt something else, too. I felt alive. I lifted my head and looked at Simon. "The escrow is secure. We proceed with the expansion plan tomorrow morning." Simon smiled, a genuine, terrifying expression. I knew I invested in the right horse. "Get some rest, Claire. Tomorrow, We built an empire. The penthouse was suffocatingly quiet when I unlocked the front door at 8 p.m. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the foyer, letting my eyes adjust to the ambient amber glow of the streetlights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The air was stale, heavily conditioned, and still carrying the faint, lingering trace of Thomas's cologne. I took off my heels. The floorboards were cold against my bare feet. I walked slowly into the living room, my gaze fixed on the center of the space. The Persian rug, the imported marble coffee table, my breath caught in my throat, a sharp, physical snag. I could see the exact corner of the marble. It was veined with gray and gold, perfectly polished, ruthlessly sharp. I walked over to it and sank to my knees. The wool of the rug scratched against my silk trousers. I reached out and ran my index finger along the brutal 90-degree angle of the stone. There was no blood. The cream fibers of the rug were pristine. I pressed my hand to the back of my neck, right at the base of my skull, feeling for a fracture, a scab, a tender spot. There was nothing, just smooth skin and the slight dampness of nervous sweat. But the phantom pain was there, a deep, throbbing ache radiating down my spine. I had died here, in this exact spot, 24 hours from now, in a timeline that no longer existed. My heart had stopped beating while the man I loved walked away. A sudden, violent wave of nausea hit me. I scrambled up, practically crawling away from the table, and ran to the kitchen sink. I gripped the stainless steel edge, coughing, dry heaving until my ribs ached and tears blurred my vision. The metallic taste of adrenaline and bile coated the back of my tongue. I turned on the faucet, splashing freezing water onto my face. I gasped, the shock of the cold grounding me. I grabbed a paper towel, pressing it hard into my eyes. You survived, I told myself. You cut out the rot. My phone buzzed on the granite counter. The harsh vibration rattled the marble. I looked at the screen. Thomas. He had called 42 times since the security guards escorted him out of the building. He had sent a barrage of texts ranging from furious threats of lawsuits to pathetic, rambling apologies. I hadn't read them. I just watched the notifications stack up, cold data points of a collapsing ego. I let it ring out. Then it immediately buzzed again. I swiped answer and put it on speaker, setting the phone down on the cold stone. I didn't say anything. I just listened to him breathe. Claire, he croaked. His voice was raw, thick with alcohol and panic. The smooth, baritone modulation he used in boardrooms was entirely gone. Claire, please talk to me. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms over my chest. I stared at the blinking green light on the screen. You locked my accounts, he said, his breathing ragged. My personal accounts, Claire. The joint checking. The savings. My credit cards are declining. I tried to check into the Four Seasons, and the card bounced. Simon's lawyers filed an emergency injunction, I said. My voice was a monotone, devoid of pity, devoid of anger. You breached your fiduciary duty. The separation agreement you signed forfeits your equity to cover the company's damages. Since the exact scope of your attempted embezzlement requires a full forensic audit, all marital and joint assets are frozen to prevent capital flight. Standard legal procedure. Standard procedure? He yelled, the sudden spike in volume distorting the tiny speaker. I have $80 in cash. You left me with nothing. You took the company, you took my job, and now you're starving me out? You tried to steal $2.4 million to fund Evelyn's vanity project, I replied, tracing a bead of water on the countertop with my finger. You starved yourself, Thomas. I was going to put it back, he sobbed. It was an ugly, wet sound. Aura, is about to sign a retail distribution deal. I just needed the bridge capital for the inventory. I was going to replace the escrow before the quarterly audit. You wouldn't have even known. The sheer delusion of it made me close my eyes. He still didn't understand. He thought this was about the math. He thought this was a business dispute. I would have known, Thomas. And the moment I found out, you would have hurt me to keep it quiet. What? No. Claire, I would never hurt you. The lie was so instinctive, so effortlessly delivered, it made my skin crawl. He genuinely believed his own fiction. He believed he was the good guy in his own story. Just a man who made a complicated financial maneuver. He had completely detached from the reality of the monster he was willing to become. "Where is Evelyn?" I asked quietly. There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the line. I heard the clink of ice against glass. He was drinking heavily. "She changed the locks on the condo," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She won't answer my calls. She sent me a text saying her lawyer advised her to cut all ties to avoid criminal conspiracy charges." A harsh, joyless laugh escaped my throat. Of course she did. The money's gone, Thomas. She was in love with the CFO of Omni Logistics. She doesn't want an unemployed, bankrupt fraud sleeping on her couch. "Claire, please, let me come home. We can talk about this. I'll do whatever you want. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't leave me out here." I looked at the marble coffee table. I remembered the smell of his leather shoes. "Do not ever come back to this building," I said, my voice dropping to a dead, icy whisper. "If you step foot in the lobby, the concierge has orders to call the police. Tomorrow, movers are going to pack all of your clothes and personal items. They will be left in boxes on the loading dock. You have until noon to collect them before the sanitation department takes them." "Claire," I ended the call. I picked up the phone and walked into the master bedroom. I opened his massive, custom-built cedar closet. Rows of tailored suits, hundreds of silk ties, polished Italian leather shoes, perfectly aligned on slanted racks. I didn't feel the urge to destroy them. I didn't want to cut the suits or smash the watches. That kind of revenge was for people who still cared, people who were still tethered to the emotion of the relationship. I was entirely untethered. I just wanted the space empty. I wanted the infection surgically excised from my home. I called a premium packing service. I paid triple their emergency rate for a team to arrive at 6 a.m. That night, I didn't sleep in the bed. I took a blanket and slept on the floor of my home office, the door locked, my back pressed against the heavy wooden desk. The financial destruction of Thomas Cole was not a swift execution. It was a slow, methodical suffocation by 1,000 paper cuts. By 10 a.m. the next morning, the news of his sudden departure had leaked. Simon didn't just fire Thomas. He systematically dismantled his reputation within the venture capital ecosystem. Simon made 3 phone calls to the major firms in the city. He didn't explicitly accuse Thomas of a crime. That would be a liability. He merely stated that Omni Logistics had severed ties due to irreconcilable breaches of trust regarding capital management. In our world, that phrase was a death sentence. It meant you were radioactive. I sat at my desk at the office, the door closed, sipping black coffee. The chaotic hum of the bullpen outside felt distant. My monitor was split into 2 screens. On the left, the deployment schedule for the Series B funds. On the right, my personal inbox. The emails from Thomas's creditors started trickling in around noon. Because we were married, and because he had handled the business side of our lives, I was listed as a secondary contact on several of his private accounts. I watched the automated alerts populate. Payment failed. Portia Financial Services. Margin call. Alert. TD. Ameritrade. Private client. Account overdrawn. Platinum tier. He had been living incredibly close to the edge. He was using his massive omni salary to service the debt on a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford. The Rolexes, the bespoke suits, the leased sports car, the luxury condo for Evelyn, it was all a house of cards built on the assumption that my software would keep generating limitless wealth. Without his equity, and with his bank accounts frozen by our lawyers, the cards were collapsing in real time. At 2 p.m., my desk phone rang. It was the lobby security desk. "Ms. Cole," the guard said, his tone perfectly professional but carrying a hint of tension. "Your husband, sorry, Mr. Cole is down here. He's causing a bit of a scene. He's demanding to speak with you." "Is he violent?" I asked, pulling up the lobby security camera feed on my monitor. "No, ma'am, just loud, refusing to leave." I watched the grainy footage. Thomas was pacing in front of the marble reception desk. He was wearing the same clothes he had on yesterday. The suit jacket was wrinkled, the shirt untucked. His hair, usually styled with expensive pomade, was a mess. Even in standard definition, he looked hollowed out. "I'll come down," I said. I didn't take the main elevators. I took the secure freight elevator to the parking garage and walked up to the lobby through the side entrance. When Thomas saw me, he stopped pacing. He took a step forward, but the two security guards immediately stepped into his path, crossing their arms. "Claire," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous lobby. I stopped 10 feet away from him. The smell hit me before he spoke again. Stale sweat, heavy alcohol, and the sharp, sour tang of pure panic. "The movers left my boxes on the street," he said, his hands trembling, as he gestured vaguely toward the doors. "It started raining, Claire. The boxes are ruined. Everything is ruined. I told you they would be on the loading dock until noon," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "It's 2:15. You were late." He stared at me, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. "I got a margin call this morning. They're liquidating my personal stock portfolio to cover the leverage. The car lease company is threatening to repossess the Porsche. I can't even hire a lawyer because the retainer check bounced." "I know," I said. "I'm getting the automated alerts." His jaw worked, muscles flexing in a tight, ugly rhythm. "Are you enjoying this? Watching me beg?" "No," I answered honestly. "I don't feel anything at all, Thomas. I look at you, and I just feel tired. I want you to leave, and I want you to stop calling me." "You did this!" he suddenly screamed, spittle flying from his lips. He lunged forward, but the guards caught him instantly, slamming him back against the marble pillar. He struggled against them, his polished shoes slipping on the floor. "You trapped me. You set me up with the escrow. You're a sociopath." I walked closer, stopping just out of his reach. The guards held him firmly, his arms pinned to his sides. "I didn't forge Evelyn's lease. I didn't set up the shell company. I didn't initiate the wire transfer," I said quietly, leaning in so only he could hear me over his own heavy breathing. "I just took away the blindfold, Thomas. I saw the portal." He stopped struggling. His eyes widened, fixing on my face. "The portal," he whispered. "I saw the laptop," I said, holding his gaze. "I saw exactly what you are, and I realized that if you ever got cornered, you would step over my bleeding body without a second thought just to save yourself. So I moved first." I wasn't sure if he understood the depth of what I was saying. He couldn't know about the marble table. He couldn't know about the blood on the rug. But he heard the absolute, unyielding truth in my voice. His shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him, leaving only an empty, pathetic shell of a man. "Escort him off the property," I said to the guards, stepping back. "If he returns, press trespassing charges." I turned my back on him and walked toward the elevators. I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't need to. I heard the scuffle of his shoes, the heavy breathing, the sound of the automatic doors sliding open, and then, finally, silence. The execution was complete. 3 weeks later, the rain was falling heavily in the city, drumming a relentless rhythm against the massive windows of my new apartment. It wasn't a penthouse. It was a stark, ultra-modern loft in a converted industrial building across town. Concrete floors, exposed brick, minimal furniture, no Persian rugs, no marble coffee tables. I was sitting on a simple leather sofa, a heavy blanket draped over my legs, my laptop glowing in the dim light. Omni Logistics had finalized the Series B expansion. The tech press had briefly covered Thomas's sudden exit, burying it under PR jargon about strategic restructuring and shifting management visions. Simon handled the board, I handled the code. Without Thomas constantly trying to push aggressive, unvetted sales tactics, the engineering team had stabilized. We were thriving. Evelyn had vanished. The tabloids and industry blogs never picked up the scandal, mostly because Simon's lawyers threatened nuclear litigation against anyone who printed the name Omni next to embezzlement. But word travels in quiet circles. Evelyn's PR consultancy effectively died overnight. Last I heard, she moved back to the Midwest to live with her parents, her reputation in the tech sector entirely radioactive. And Thomas, the divorce papers were finalized with brutal efficiency. Without access to capital, he couldn't fight Simon's corporate counsel. He defaulted on the separation agreement clauses, officially forfeiting every single share of his equity to cover the audit and legal costs. He filed for Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy 2 days ago. He had nothing. I closed my laptop and set it on the cushion next to me. The screen went dark, casting my reflection in the glossy glass. I looked at myself. The dark circles under my eyes were fading. The tension in my jaw had loosened. I looked healthy. I looked successful. I reached up and touched the back of my neck. My fingers traced the smooth, unbroken skin at the base of my skull. It was a habit now, a nervous tick. Whenever the room got too quiet, whenever the rain hit the glass at a certain angle, I would touch my neck, checking to make sure my skull was intact. I survived. I won. I dismantled the people who tried to destroy me, and I did it flawlessly. But as I sat in the cold, cavernous loft, listening to the rain, I realized the ultimate truth about revenge. It doesn't heal you. It doesn't undo the betrayal. It just clears the rot. You still have to live in the empty space it leaves behind. I was reborn, yes, but I was reborn harder, colder, and infinitely more isolated. I would never trust blindly again. I would never look at a smile without wondering what it was hiding. The naive, exhausted coder who just wanted to build something beautiful with her husband was dead on that Persian rug. The woman who replaced her was a CEO. She was a survivor. She was a ghost who refused to haunt and chose to rule instead. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. I picked up my mug of tea. It was lukewarm. I took a sip, looked out at the city skyline, and for the first time in a month, I let myself cry. Not for him, not for the company, but for the piece of myself I had to cut away to survive. The tears were hot, spilling over my cheeks, dropping silently onto the leather sofa. I let them fall. I let the grief wash over me, knowing that tomorrow the alarm would go off, the servers would hum, and I would put the armor back on. But tonight, I was just a woman who had lived through the end of her world and built a new one on the ashes. They thought they could bury me. They thought my life's work was just an ATM for their lies. But betrayal is a funny thing. It doesn't always break you. Sometimes it forges you into something completely unbreakable. Thomas and Evelyn learned the hard way that when you steal from a builder, they know exactly which pillars to kick out to bring the roof crashing down on your head. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If this satisfied your craving for justice, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good comeback, and subscribe for more stories of revenge and redemption. Let me know in the comments. What would you have done? See you next time.